The teacher stands at the front of the classroom, looking out over the sea of young faces filled with curiosity. With a gentle smile, the teacher asks, "Have you ever wondered who you really are? I mean, deep down, beneath all the labels, your name, your age, your nationality, who are you truly?" The room falls silent as the students exchange glances, the question hanging in the air, heavier than they'd expected. The teacher continues, leaning in slightly as if sharing a secret, "This isn't just some abstract philosophical question. It's the kind of question that can change the way you see everything. And there's one person who spent his entire life exploring this question in a way that no one else had done before. His name was Alan Watts, and he was a master at opening people's eyes to the mysteries of life." With that, the teacher begins to pace slowly across the front of the room, their voice filled with excitement and passion. You see, Alan Watts was more than just a philosopher or a writer. He was a guide, a bridge between two worlds, the East and the West, the mystical and the rational. He dared to ask questions that many of us are too afraid to ask, and he did it in a way that invited everyone to join him on the journey. He once asked, "What if everything we think we know about ourselves is just a story? What if there's a deeper reality waiting for us to discover?" The students lean forward, intrigued. The teacher stops and looks at them with a twinkle in their eye. "So today, we're going to embark on that journey together. We're going to explore the life and teachings of Alan Watts and see if we can't find some answers, or maybe just better questions. Are you ready to dive deep? Because Alan Watts would say that the real adventure starts when we're willing to question everything we think we know about who we are." With that invitation, the teacher launches into the story of Alan Watts, the students now fully engaged, ready to explore the mysteries of self and existence alongside one of the greatest thinkers of the 20th century. Alright, class, today we're going to dive into the fascinating life of a man who truly changed the way many people think about existence and spirituality, Alan Watts. Yes, Alan Watts. Have you ever heard of him? Well, even if you haven't, by the end of today, I promise you'll find his story and his ideas absolutely captivating. Alan Watts was a British philosopher, writer, and speaker, and he had this incredible knack for making complex ideas seem simple. He was born on January 6, 1915, in a quaint little village in England called Chislehurst. Now, imagine a young boy growing up in a strict Christian household, where religious doctrine and the teachings of the church were everything. But Alan, even as a child, wasn't content just to accept what he was taught. Can you picture that? A young boy, sitting in church, questioning everything he heard, his mind buzzing with thoughts about the deeper mysteries of life. What courage it must have taken, don't you think? To question everything around you and seek something more. From an early age, Alan was driven by a deep curiosity about existence. Not just about how things worked or why the sky is blue, no, he was fascinated by the very essence of being. What does it mean to exist? Why are we here? What is this self we all talk about? These are the kinds of questions that were swirling around in his young mind. And so, while many of his peers were simply absorbing the Christian teachings of the time, Alan began to look elsewhere, searching for answers that resonated more deeply with his inner sense of wonder and awe. And you know what? He found something incredible. He discovered the mystical and esoteric sides of religion, the parts that talk about the divine, the mysterious, the unknowable. Have you ever felt that pull towards something mysterious and vast, something you can't quite explain but feel deeply? That's what Alan felt, and it led him on a journey far beyond the confines of his small village and the Christian doctrines he grew up with. As he grew older, Alan's quest for deeper understanding led him to explore Eastern philosophies. He encountered Buddhism and Hinduism, not in their pure, unfiltered forms, but through the writings of various scholars and translators. Imagine discovering a whole new world, a world that thinks completely differently about life, death, the self, and the universe. Alan was hooked. He read voraciously, trying to understand these new ideas. He came across Theosophy, a spiritual movement that tried to blend Eastern and Western spiritual traditions. It was like discovering a treasure chest filled with ancient wisdom that spoke directly to his soul. Then, something big happened. In 1938, Alan made a life-changing decision. He moved to the United States. Now, why would a young man leave everything behind and cross the ocean? Well, Alan wanted to immerse himself even more deeply in the study of Eastern religions. He felt that America, with its spirit of exploration and openness to new ideas, was the perfect place for his spiritual journey. Can you imagine the excitement and fear of moving to a new country all for the sake of following your passion? Once in America, Alan didn't just study, he became actively involved in spiritual life. He joined the Episcopal Church and was even ordained as a priest in 1945. Can you picture that, Alan Watts, a priest in a church, preaching to a congregation? But as you might guess, this didn't last long. Alan quickly realized that the traditional religious practices of the church didn't quite satisfy his growing spiritual needs. He was searching for something more personal, more direct, a kind of spirituality that you feel deep in your bones, not just in your mind. By 1950, Alan had left the ministry. He wasn't interested in traditional roles or institutions anymore. He wanted to experience spirituality directly, and he found that in Zen Buddhism and Taoism. Have any of you ever felt like the usual ways of doing things just don't cut it for you? Like you need to find your own path? That's exactly how Alan felt. And so, he struck out on his own, becoming an independent scholar. This gave him the freedom to explore his interests without the constraints of traditional academia. It was a bold move, wasn't it? To give up the security of a conventional career to follow his heart. Alan's fascination with Zen Buddhism grew, especially in the late 1940s. This wasn't just a passing interest, it was a deep dive into a new way of thinking and being. He began to write extensively about Zen, and his writings weren't just for scholars or religious folks, they were for everyone. In 1957, he published The Way of Zen, a book that would change everything. This book was groundbreaking. It introduced Zen concepts to a Western audience in a way that was both understandable and deeply engaging. Imagine opening a book and feeling like a whole new universe is unfolding before you. That's what The Way of Zen did for many readers. Now, let's talk about some of the ideas Alan Watts was known for. Starting with his thoughts on the self. This is a big one, so I want you to really think about it. In the West, we often think of ourselves as separate, individual beings, like little islands, each standing alone. But Alan, influenced by both Eastern philosophies and modern psychology, challenged this idea. He argued that the sense of a separate self is actually an illusion created by the mind. Isn't that a radical thought? That what we think of as me or I is not really what we think it is. It's just a collection of thoughts, experiences, and perceptions, always changing, never the same from one moment to the next. This idea of the self being an illusion is closely tied to a Buddhist concept called anatta, or no self. Buddhism teaches that there is no permanent, unchanging self. Instead, what we think of as the self is just a bundle of ever-changing experiences. And Alan took this concept and ran with it. He argued that realizing the self as an illusion could be incredibly liberating. Why? Because if the self is just an illusion, then we're not bound by the endless cycle of desires, fears, and anxieties that come with thinking we are separate, isolated beings. Instead, we can experience a sense of oneness with the universe, a feeling of being deeply connected to everything around us. Now, let me ask you, have you ever had a moment where you felt completely connected to everything? Maybe it was watching a sunset, or listening to your favorite music, or even just being with a loved one. Those moments where you feel like there's no separation between you and the world, that's the kind of experience Alan Watts was talking about. He believed that if we could let go of our rigid ideas about the self, we could experience life in a much more profound and fulfilling way. But Alan didn't stop there. He also talked a lot about the illusion of control and what he called the wisdom of insecurity. This is another big one, so pay attention. How often do we go through life trying to control everything around us? We want security, we want certainty, we want to know what's going to happen next. But Alan argued that this quest for control and security is ultimately futile. Why? Because life, by its very nature, is uncertain and ever-changing. Nothing is permanent, everything is in a constant state of flux. Think about it, doesn't that ring true in your own life? Instead of resisting this reality, Alan encouraged people to embrace it. He suggested that we should learn to live in the present moment, accepting life's inherent uncertainty. In Zen Buddhism and Taoism, this is sometimes referred to as wu-wei, or non-action, not in the sense of doing nothing, but in the sense of not forcing things, not resisting the natural flow of life. Imagine floating down a river in a boat. Instead of paddling frantically against the current, you let the river carry you. That's the kind of attitude Alan Watts advocated. Doesn't that sound like a more peaceful way to live? And there's more. Alan also delved into the concept of the unity of opposites. This is a classic idea from Taoist philosophy, represented by the yin-yang symbol. According to this view, opposites like light and dark, good and evil, life and death aren't truly separate, they're interconnected and interdependent. You can't have one without the other. Alan loved to use metaphors to explain this idea. He'd say, imagine a wave in the ocean. The wave is its own thing, sure, but it's also part of the ocean. It can't exist without the ocean. In the same way, individual experiences and phenomena are all part of a larger, interconnected reality. He was basically telling us to look beyond the surface of things, to see the deeper connections that bind everything together. Isn't that a beautiful idea? That underneath all the apparent chaos and division in the world, there's a fundamental unity, a wholeness that connects us all. During the 1960s, Alan Watts became a major figure in the counterculture movement. This was a time when many young people were rejecting traditional values and looking for alternative ways to live and understand the world. And here comes Alan, with his radical ideas about the self, reality, and spirituality. His teachings resonated with a whole generation that was tired of the materialism and conformity of mainstream society. People were hungry for new ways of thinking, for authentic experiences, for deeper meaning, and Alan Watts was there to offer a guiding light. Now, let's talk about something a bit more controversial, Alan's views on psychedelics. Yes, that's right, psychedelics. During the 1960s, these substances became quite popular as tools for exploring consciousness. Alan was intrigued by their potential to provide insights into the nature of the self and reality. He saw them as a way to break down the usual boundaries of thought and perception, to glimpse deeper truths. But, and this is important, he was cautious about their use. He didn't see psychedelics as a shortcut to enlightenment or as a replacement for regular spiritual practice. He thought they could offer valuable glimpses, but not the sustained understanding that comes from a dedicated spiritual path. Now, despite his influence and popularity, Alan Watts wasn't without his critics. Some people felt that his interpretation of Zen and other Eastern philosophies was too simplistic. They argued that in making these teachings accessible to a Western audience, he sometimes glossed over important complexities and nuances. They felt that he was giving people the Cliff's Notes version of Eastern philosophy, rather than the full, rich tradition. What do you think? Is it better to simplify ideas so more people can understand them, or to keep them complex, even if that means fewer people will get it? Others criticized Alan for his personal lifestyle. He enjoyed many pleasures of life, good food, good drink, relationships, and some felt this was at odds with the ascetic, disciplined life often associated with Eastern spirituality. They wondered, could someone really understand and teach Eastern philosophies if they weren't living them out in a more traditional way? But Alan had his own response to this. He believed in living life fully and authentically. He wasn't about renouncing life's pleasures, he was about experiencing life in all its richness and complexity. After all, isn't spirituality about embracing all of life, not just the parts that are easy or comfortable. Despite these criticisms, Alan Watts remained a respected and influential figure. His ability to communicate complex ideas in an engaging and relatable way made him a beloved teacher for many. He had this incredible way of speaking and writing, so conversational, so approachable. He used humor, anecdotes, and stories to bring abstract philosophical concepts down to earth. Have you ever read a book or listened to a talk where the speaker makes you feel like they're speaking directly to you, like they're a friend guiding you through deep waters? That's the kind of presence Alan had. He didn't just write books, though he wrote many, including The Way of Zen, The Wisdom of Insecurity, the book On the Taboo Against Knowing Who You Are, and Tao, The Watercourse Way. He also gave countless lectures, many of which were recorded and broadcast on radio. People loved listening to him because he made them think. Really think about the nature of reality, the self, and the universe. His voice was both soothing and provocative, inviting listeners to explore new ways of seeing the world. So, what's Alan Watts' legacy? Well, his influence extends far beyond his lifetime. His books and recordings are still widely read and listened to today. His ideas have found new audiences in the digital age, resonating with contemporary movements in mindfulness, psychology, and environmentalism. Many modern spiritual teachers, writers, and thinkers have cited him as an influence. He helped bridge the gap between Eastern and Western thought, making profound teachings accessible to a Western audience that might not have otherwise encountered them. But his work also raises important questions about how we interpret and engage with spiritual traditions that come from cultures different from our own. How do we respect the depth and complexity of these traditions while also making them accessible to new audiences? How do we balance intellectual understanding with direct experience? These are questions that Alan Watts' life and work invite us to consider. In the end, Alan Watts was a bridge builder, an explorer of consciousness, and a provocateur who challenged us to see beyond the ordinary. His teachings continue to inspire and challenge us to explore the deeper aspects of existence, to live more authentically, and to recognize the interconnectedness of all things. As we continue to navigate the complexities of modern life, his wisdom offers a timeless reminder to look beyond the surface and find meaning in the deeper currents of existence. So, let's keep asking those big questions, just like Alan did. Who knows where they'll lead? As the class progresses, the students are captivated by the life and ideas of Alan Watts, their minds swirling with new perspectives and profound questions. The teacher, seeing the wonder and curiosity in their eyes, knows it's time to bring the lesson to a close. The teacher pauses, letting the room settle into a reflective silence, before speaking again with a calm, thoughtful tone. All right, everyone, the teacher begins. We've journeyed through Alan Watts' life today, from his early years in England to his profound influence in America, and his exploration of Eastern philosophies like Zen Buddhism and Taoism. We've talked about his ideas on the illusion of the self, the wisdom of embracing uncertainty, and the unity of opposites. And I know these concepts can feel a bit overwhelming, almost like they're too big to grasp. But remember, that's exactly what Alan Watts wanted us to feel. The teacher moves slowly to the front of the room, leaning against the desk, speaking more softly now. He wanted us to feel the mystery, the wonder, the awe of it all. To understand that life isn't about finding definitive answers, but about asking the right questions and being open to where those questions might lead. Watts often spoke about life as a dance, something to be enjoyed in the moment, not a puzzle to be solved. He taught us that it's okay not to have everything figured out. In fact, that's the whole point, to embrace the journey. The uncertainty, the process of discovery. The teacher looks around the room, meeting the eyes of each student, making sure they feel the weight of the words. So, I leave you with this. As you go out into the world, don't be afraid to question the stories you've been told about who you are or what life is supposed to be. Don't be afraid to let go of the need to control every aspect of your life. Instead, try to see life as Alan Watts did, a beautiful, ever-changing dance. Embrace the mystery, the uncertainty, the interconnectedness of all things. Allow yourself to be present in each moment, to truly experience life as it unfolds. The teacher smiles warmly, sensing the students' minds are still turning, processing all they've heard. And remember, it's okay if you don't understand everything right away. In fact, it's better that way. Keep asking questions, keep exploring, and most importantly, keep an open mind and heart. That's what Alan Watts would have wanted. That's what leads to true wisdom. The room is filled with a thoughtful silence, the students reflecting on the journey they've just taken. The teacher claps their hands softly, breaking the silence with a light-hearted chuckle. All right, that's enough deep thinking for today. Let's bring our minds back to the present moment. Who's ready for some fresh air? The students smile and start gathering their things, still pondering the profound ideas they've explored. As they leave the room, they carry with them a piece of Alan Watts' wisdom, a spark of curiosity that will stay with them long after the lesson has ended. The teacher watches them go, knowing that today's lesson was just the beginning of their own journeys into understanding the deeper currents of life.